I'm your host, Megalon Jones, and welcome back to the Sharp End of the Stick. We're playing Combat Mission Final Blitzkrieg, and in this scenario, it is December 20th, 1944, and the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment has been tasked with slamming itself into the right shoulder of the German advance into the Ardennes. We're going to have a couple companies worth of paratroopers, and our job is to clear out Cheneux. We've got just a little bit of support, mostly from the weapons platoon, involving additional light machine guns. We've got 4 tubes of 75mm pack howitzers and a couple tank destroyers to help us along. It is in the very late afternoon, and it's cold, dark, and wet. There's no snow on the ground, but there is quite a bit of mud, which is going to mean I'm going to have to use roads with the tank destroyers. Now, the main feature of this whole terrain is that, in my opinion, I'm going to use this right slope of this ridge as cover and concealment to move my units. I don't really want to move on top of the ridge, as there's lots of open areas. If I was the German commander, I would have this entire area sighted in with machine guns and mortars. So we're not going to spend any time on the top of the plateau, or less time than usual. The German positions have a couple really nice defensive positions, namely this little piece of dead terrain here that they can use as hull down for MGs, mortars, infantry vehicles, tanks. We are facing the Waffen-SS, so I expect the resistance to be very difficult. The initial plan calls for me to put a very quick and heavy 75mm artillery barrage on the very first victory point location. That is the road junction, and we're going to take 1st Platoon B Company throughout the woods on the right to advance to contact. We're going to be getting the rest of our force in dribs and drabs over the next half hour or so. So I'm just going to use 1st Platoon as more or less a scouting force. The quality of my troops is uniformly good. Most are veterans. There are a few crack squads. And the 75mm artillery hits their targets, although I don't know if they're actually hitting anything yet. Within about 5 minutes, we start to get sound contacts on the road. This is a vehicle. And as I push forward with my troops in this first part of the woods here, we run into what ends up being the Waffen-SS picket line. The German picket ends up being a 2-fire team element, so it's a squad split down and put in the woods. They don't give us really any problem at all. I suffer, I think, 2 casualties, 1 death and 1 wounded before these guys get liquidated. As we're moving forward, something very interesting does happen as we take a round of something really heavy. So that indicates they have something that can throw high explosives at us. Here on the right flank of the woods, we basically turn this into our base of support. This is where we're going to use as the springboard for the further attack. We also get our two M36 Jackson tank destroyers. As usual, these things are open-top vehicles with very little in the way of high explosives, but they should be excellent at taking out German armor, assuming we find it. So here we are. I know I said we wouldn't be attacking up the main plateau, and then first platoon Charlie is basically going to be going along with the tank destroyers as a probe. The main attack towards the Butte house is going to be taking part on the right with 1st Platoon and 3rd Platoon Baker Company. And we're going to be holding 2nd Platoon Baker and 2nd Charlie more or less as in a reserve. The first thing that kicks us in the face is a fairly heavy German mortar or artillery barrage. Pretty quickly we get spot on the culprit. It is a German mortar half-track. We're also getting a lot of MG fire on the far right flank, which is firing into the flank of my advancing 1st Platoon Baker. I don't know if I've ever really mentioned this before, but my absolute piece of gear in the USTOE is the 60 millimeter mortar. Its ability to fire rapid and accurate 60 millimeter mortar rounds is exceptional. The secret to beating an indirect fire attack is to push your troops through it and not to get bogged down inside it. And because of the good training and morale, we're able to do that. Okay, here you can more or less see the top-down overview of what's going on and the more or less positions of 1st Battalion. We've made it almost up to the Butte house without running into any type of real resistance, although we're starting to get German forces there. You can also see that the Germans are in a position at the road junction, so we've got to take all of this into account and see exactly what type of resistance we got. The Butte house is fortified with dug-in troops as well as people in the buildings. And 1st Platoon Baker Company has to end up coming to a halt right in front of it. I've more or less expected this, and this type of opposition has been baked into the plan. There's platoons behind it that can support and continue on the attack. On the main road, I'm using my 2 TDs to charge forward and shoot up the German mortar vehicle that we spotted. We can't let that thing live. Alongside the mortar vehicle, we also make spots with a self-propelled gun half-track. So we dispatch the mortar carrier, and then we rinse and repeat with that thing. And hopefully we've taken out a nice chunk of the Germans' firepower. Unfortunately, one of my Jacksons, the commander, gets shot, and it starts to rattle the crew. The 2nd Jackson takes aim at the offending sniper and puts him to ground. Okay, here we have another aerial view, more or less. This is more or less a coiling snake of American firepower. What we're going to do is we're going to use that to spring into the Butte house and the road junction. The road junction objective seems to be held by another German screening force, and there's just simply too much firepower available on my end for them to hold it. Once we got the road junction in our hands, we're able to see farther down the German lines at the next set of positions, an observation post site. This is much more heavily defended. There's a series of interlocking foxholes with a lot of MG42 submachine gun and rifle positions alongside a really nasty German flak, self-propelled flak gun, which can just absolutely shred infantry. Continuing the push forward means really close support between infantry, the tank destroyers, and mortars. Basically, we suppress the German infantry with mortars and supporting weapon fire, move forward the tank destroyers to try to get sights on the flak vehicle. Once the flak carrier gets destroyed, we're more or less halting on the plateau along the main road. Anybody left there as friendly forces are going to be used to pin down the Germans in the OP position. Taking up the baton from 1st Platoon Bakers, 2nd Platoon Bakers, they continue the assault on the Butte House. It takes a good 5 minutes of continuous hammering before we're able to drive off or kill the Germans occupying that position. Okay, now for the coup de main. It's getting dark, which I like because that will give me more cover. The plan is to throw 3 platoons online into a right-hand attack into the main German position. They're going to be covered by smoke fired in front of their attack. And we more or less have the Germans pinned down at the OP site position. So I think by flanking them, we can do this pretty efficiently. All 3 platoons are able to advance under the cover of smoke. And we get involved in a pretty close quarters fight, clearing out German foxholes. If there's a downside to the use of the tank destroyers is the fact that you only have so much high explosives. And at this point, we're pretty much having to be really conscientious as to what I shoot at with them, to the point where I'm now more or less directing them to fire manually rather than using the TAC AI. We do get a couple more surprises. There's some more Germans vehicles that we have to take out, including another auto flat cannon. The smoke screen dissipates just in time for us to clean up the OP site, and all this reveals what is the last of the German defenses. They appear to have something like the better part of a platoon in and around the Gaspard house. So we've got to come up with some sort of plan to deal with that and win the match. Okay, so this is how we're going to skin this cat. We're going to put 2 platoons online at the OP site and use their combined firepower, especially when combined with the additional LMGs we get from the weapons platoon, to suppress the Gaspard house, hit them along the tree line with 2nd Platoon Baker Company. All of this is going to be supported by the 60mm mortars we can bring up, as well as the 2 tank destroyers firing AP into the house. I'm just hoping that's going to suppress them, that they're out of HE ammunition, and the crews are pretty fragile at this point. So it all, more or less, we have to do this now with what we have on hand. The initial amount of fire coming from out of the Gaspard house is actually pretty intense. But by splitting up squads into fire teams, I'm able to disperse that fire, or the impact of that fire. And the size of the squads of the American forces alongside by virtue of them being paratroopers, allows me a little bit more flexibility. They don't necessarily wither under fire the same way, say, regular army would. And it takes maybe 3 or 4 turns before the Germans in the Gaspard house basically have had enough, and we're able to seize the house and come to a victory in the end. This will be the 2nd German position, 2nd Platoon B Company has taken, and they end up being the MVPs of the scenario. All that's really left for me to do is bum rush my troops forward, take the position and hit the ceasefire button to see exactly how much I won. And I get a total victory. We've taken some losses, nowhere near as much as the Germans. I really like the scenario. It's interesting to play in the cold and dark where there isn't much snow, but there is a lot of mud. And you can see at the end of the map, or at the end of the scenario, this is how it more or less ended. You know, sometimes there's a question is, do I take really good troops or less stuff, or more stuff and less experienced troops? And in this position, you get both. You get a lot of stuff and you get really good quality troops. You also got to pay attention to the fact that the M19 30 caliber Browning machine guns, you're going to get a lot of them in this scenario. They help out a lot. Them and the 60 millimeter mortars are like essential if you're going to take what amounts to like a light infantry force, paratroopers, into against a mechanized troop. It would have been a lot better if I had tanks as opposed to tank destroyers, but that would have probably given me too much of an edge. As everyone knows, tank destroyers have the open tops. But that's it for now. Next scenario is going to be a player versus player Cold War match. I'll see you later.
In 1972, in Vietnam,
move out.
They were trained to be the best. In the worst hell on Earth, the Annihilators. Now, in 1985, in the back streets of an American city, one of them stood up for justice and paid with his life. And together, his buddies are coming back for the ultimate revenge. The home front is the battlefield. They're gonna teach a neighborhood how to fight back.
There's gonna be a lot of mad punks around here.
And together, they're going to prove they can make a difference.
Who the hell are these guys, anyway?
The Annihilators.
I got a busload of your kids.
And even though the war is over,
Let's go. We're the only hope they've got.
I'm gonna start throwing out dead kids.
the real battle has only just begun. And for a neighborhood in trouble, they're coming to the rescue. Soon, every town in America is gonna want them on their side. They're the new heat on the street, the Annihilators.